Welcome to the broadcast. Tonight, Harry Wu sits in a prison cell in China. We'll talk about what it means for U.S.-Chinese relations.
Well, what you've got to do is to pull it down out of the rhetorical plane. Right now, we are having a slanging match over principles, sovereignty, arresting a citizen, consular agreements. This is a very sterile phase. Drop it down into negotiations. What do you want that we got, and what do you got that we want?
And a conversation with Commander Jim Lovell about Apollo 13.
And then as I drifted over the spacecraft and looked at the instrument panels and saw us losing oxygen, and looked out the window and saw it escaping, and realizing that the command module, the Odyssey, was dying, then the old lead weight went down to the bottom of my stomach, and I knew that, hey, not only are we not going to land on the moon, but we might not even land back on Earth.
Sir David Hannay, who was to be on tonight's broadcast, will be on tomorrow night. In the meantime, we go from Chinese-American relations to Jim Lovell in space when we continue. The arrest of Chinese-American dissident Harry Wu is but the latest sour note in Sino-American relations. Last month, the Clinton administration allowed the president of Taiwan into this country, despite Beijing's protest, and yesterday, House Speaker Newt Gingrich said he supported restoring diplomatic ties with Taiwan. Where do Chinese-American relations stand today? Joining me now from Washington is former U.S. Ambassador to China, James Lilly. Mr. Ambassador, thank you for joining us.
Thank you for inviting me.
I want to defer that question in a second as to what is happening between Chinese-American relations and why it seems to be getting worse. With the question of Mr. Wu, what do you think will happen to him, and how will this be resolved in your judgment?
Well, I think there's a couple of things with Mr. Wu you have to look at first before you come into any judgments about what's going to happen. First of all, Harry Wu has hurt China very badly in terms of his exposés of their behavior in the prison export labor, in the reform through labor camps, etc., transplanting organs. They're out to get him. They owe him a big one. They don't like him, and there's groups in China that want to take this guy and punish him. Number two, he's a chip in the great American-Chinese game of diplomatic back and forth. He also has to be discredited by the Chinese. Although Harry said today he had not been tortured, I'm sure the pressure is on him to make some kind of a statement of apology or regret or confession, whatever it is, the pressure's on. And they don't want this guy to keep going after them because he's hurt them badly. Now the Chinese claim that this, of course, is a man conducting espionage, it's a violation of their sovereignty, and they drag that old saw out any time their feelings are hurt. This is a technique they use. Sovereignty is sacred, irrefutable. This man violated our sovereignty, he must be punished. And finally, I think that they feel that the United States responds to pressure. They've got this guy in their hands in the way Khrushchev had Francis Gary Powers. And they're going to see what they can get for him. He's part of, again, this trade-off in Sino-American relations.
And what can they get for it in your judgment?
Well, they've given us a number of things that they want. Some we can live with, some we can't. They've said that they want some sort of a statement, I understand, that we will not invite the president of Taiwan back again, and they want this to be authoritative and public. And they've even suggested, I'm told, an apology for having invited him before. We can't do that. Number two, they're talking about lifting sanctions for Tiananmen. We still have some sanctions. We should get rid of them. Number three, they want to get into the World Trade Organization more or less on their own terms. We've been pretty tough on them, but they've broken the European Union slightly loose on this one. They want to get into that. They want to get in this year, and they want our help to get in. And finally, I think they would rather like to have a summit meeting, either in Osaka at APEC meeting or possibly earlier at the UN in the fall.
We've already rejected that, though, have we not?
Today, the State Department spokesman, Nick Burns, told us that we had some sort of a breakthrough coming through, and then he told a whole series of things that it wasn't going to be. A fourth communique, a summit meeting, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. I think that remains to be worked out. Everybody's staking out preliminary bargaining positions at this point.
Which of those conditions, or however you characterize them, can be met with good faith by this government, by the U.S. government?
Well, it seems to me that we are really the only country in the world that maintains sanctions on PRC, China, after Tiananmen 6 years ago. OPIC, I believe we can't have OPIC, and I believe trade development funding we can't have, military exchange, military sales. It seems to me that these probably can be lifted. There might be some problems with this, but they probably should be lifted. It seems to me we can negotiate an agreement for China to enter the World Trade Organization. They belong, they're a large trading country, but they're driving a very rough bargain, trying to get this on their own terms. We can reach a negotiated agreement on that, it seems to me. The ones you can't really do much about, it seems to me, are, first of all, saying that President Lee Teng-hui can't ever come back to the United States. I don't think we could say that. Certainly not with the public mood the way it is now, and it would be the wrong thing to do.
Well, if we do that, it just simply feeds the notion that the United States can be pushed around, does it not?
Well, I think China has that perception, and that's why they're behaving this way.
What is it that this government has done to give them that perception?
Well, I think a number of things. First, the blistering attack on President Bush during the campaign for coddling communist dictators, vetoing most favored nation human rights, the Scowcroft, Eagleburger trips were kowtowing. All this purple prose was used on the president. Well, then it came time for them to deliver, and they came up with their most favored nation human rights linkage in May 1993, 7 public conditions China had to meet, and China said no. And the American business community said no. And most strategic thinkers in the United States and around the world said no. And the administration reversed itself 180 degrees. The administration originally said no visa for President Lee Teng-hui of Taiwan. This is a violation of 6 administrations' One China policy. Even if he comes as a private citizen, this would violate the One China policy. Then they issue him a visa all of a sudden, and they say his coming here on a private status does not violate the One China policy. And the Chinese say, these guys gave in to pressure in both instances. Let's turn on the pressure and see what we can get.
What do you think of Newt Gingrich's, the speaker's, position that we should recognize Taiwan,
well,
and if that has consequences, so be it?
There are 2 parts of it, 3 parts of it. Let's put it, the first part is he is saying America should reward freedom and democracy and prosperous free markets. Taiwan is all these things. Tony Lake has said we support enlargement of freedom and democracy and free markets around the world. Newt Gingrich is saying, I support it and I'm going to do something about it. You can't argue with those principles. Those are our basic principles. Number 2, it seems to me that it's good to get a little tough with China right now. They've got the perception that we can be pushed around. They're pushing on us very hard. It seems to me we've got to say no more. You've gone far enough, no more. I think that that's the good part. I think the part that wasn't sufficiently addressed were the costs. In international affairs, when you take these unilateral moves and nobody else in the world supports you on this, you are really disturbing the international order. There is a real price to pay, and you've got to look at that very closely before you undertake this.
Why aren't they interested in having good relations with the United States? If you look at the things that this government, the Chinese government, has done over the last 6 months or so in direct contravention of American wishes, is it simply a matter of thinking we can push them around and therefore we will do it? Whether it's trading arms or whatever it is doing, it seems to reflect a disdain for good relations, even after the delinking of MFN and human rights.
I don't think that is 100% accurate. There was a brief period after delinking when Secretary Perry went over there and the trip was a love feast, and we talked about defense conversion and confidence-building measures and cooperation and ship visits, and I think it was moving along at that time. Mickey Cantor solved the intellectual property right issue temporarily. We now have a real problem in implementation, but we got to deal with them. Look at it from the Chinese perspective. When they look out at the United States and its recent actions, what do they see? They say, first of all, India is their rival in the South Asian continent. The United States is snuggling up with India, an undeclared nuclear power. Number two, United States is rapidly normalizing with Vietnam. The announcement will be made tomorrow. Vietnam, despite good Chinese relations with Vietnam at this moment, is the historic enemy. And the Americans, certain leading Americans, have said explicitly, this is done to contain China.
Senator McCain, specifically.
Others have said this too. Go into Hong Kong. For the first time in a long time, all of a sudden the Americans break out of their cocoon and they say, we stand for democracy, freedom, human rights, independent judiciary, and we're watching you, China. You better perform better on Hong Kong. And they say to us, butt out. It's not your affair. This all happens right while you're normalizing with Vietnam and while you're getting into bed with India.
So you are saying, in the essence, we are playing to their fears?
I'm just going to say two more things. Spratly Islands, a much tougher position on that, invitation for President Lee Teng-hui to come to the States, and a very strong security initiative with Japan. What does that look to the Chinese like? Containment and encirclement. And they say, you people come to us and talk about constructive engagement, and what you're doing is encircling us. And you're sending spies and saboteurs into our midst to discredit us.
But here's what I hear you saying. I hear you saying two things.
Yeah.
You're saying, on the one hand, please understand, I've been there. I understand their frame of mind. I understand their sensitivities. I understand their insecurities. I understand the role they think they ought to play in the world. I understand how they feel about their sovereignty. On the other hand, you're saying, we've got to recognize that. However, it's time for us to get tough.
All right.
Because they have perceived that we are weak, and we better correct that impression, and the way we correct it is getting tough now.
Okay, and this is starting, but we've gone to them and say, perish the thought on containment. No containment is meant. We want constructive engagement with you. We want to waltz with you. We are your friend. And they say, no, no. Actions speak louder than words. And then we say to them, you are building up your military, you're increasing your budget, you're claiming the South China Sea, you're threatening force on Taiwan,
you're arming our enemies.
You're bombing our enemy, you're doing all kinds of things. And you're building your military for rapid deployment, power projection, you're getting all this stuff from Russia. You look pretty ugly this way. And the Chinese say, oh, perish the thought. We want to get along with our neighbors. We want freedom. You're the ones that are stirring all this up. You've got a certain amount of hypocritical exchange, which doesn't advance the dialogue. And still the Chinese say, what we always had in the past in our relationship was somebody we could talk to. We had it in the Kissinger-Nixon period. We had it with Brzezinski. We had it with Brent Scowcroft. We had it with George Bush. It doesn't exist anymore. There's no interlocutor on the American side that we can talk to. That always could bridge the immediate problems that we had.
Can I tell you, help me understand, as naive as I am.
Yes. No, no.
Well, Kissinger just returned from there.
Yeah.
I believe he is probably going to go right to Washington and report his impressions and his conversations that he had in Beijing.
Right.
The message will be sent very clearly.
The message will come back from the Chinese that will be very tough, I understand. The Chinese really laid it on him hard, and they pointed out all the things that we'd done to frustrate them, the 2000 Olympics where we blocked them from getting them, the
national pride and all that.
National pride, all the things that they count on, and then, of course, the President Lee Teng-hui visit. And they say, this is an insult to us, that you did this in the way you did it. You did it with maximum provocation. We had no choice but to react the way we did. And we say to them, this man, this very strong, effective man, visited many other countries, and you never did a thing. Why are you suddenly exploding on us? Are you treating us with respect? They say, you're a superpower. We have to treat you differently. Well, it doesn't seem like you're treating us with very much respect when you yank your ambassador, pour invective all over us, and threaten us with all sorts of sanctions.
And throw an American citizen in jail.
Throw an American, yes. I tell you, it's a difficult situation. You've lost the sort of overarching strategic connection we had with China. I went through the Tiananmen thing, which was a lot worse than what these people are going through now, if you recall. The shootings in the square, the publication of this, the very heavy sanctions we imposed on them. I had to do a lot of this nasty work with them.
And I assume that all of this is, overlaying all of this, is the fact that there is enormous instability and fear about the future because of the Deng Xiaoping is not going to be with us very long.
That's a factor, but I think Deng's been out of the picture for about 2 years.
So the sides have already formed, and they're more sure in the steps that they can take individually in the reach for power.
I think this is, very often this is used as sort of an excuse that the Chinese can't act because they're having this transition problem and Deng has passed from the scene and the unity's gone. My sense is the Chinese have got a transitional leadership in motion right now.
Let me just cut to this. How will they get Wu out of there?
Well, what you've got to do is to pull it down out of the rhetorical plane. Right now, we are having a slanging match over principles, sovereignty, arresting a citizen, consular agreements. This is a very sterile phase. Drop it down into negotiations. What do you want that we got, and what do you got that we want? And then you sit down and you work something out. How do you get this done? Right now, we're in the purple prose period.
And who has the best hand?
Well, in Harry Wu's case,
they have the best hand because they have our guy.
They do. They have him right in their hands, and he's an American citizen, and they have him violating their laws. According to their laws and Constitution,
for all of our admiration for the courage and the strength and the sheer quality of presence that Harry Wu has, you mentioned the damage he had done to the Chinese. Did he play into their hands? Because they could have turned him back at the border.
And they could have refused him a visa, right? Harry Wu has slipped in before, as you know,
right,
usually through Hong Kong. And their computers weren't working very well, and he slipped in and he got in, and he really mocked their whole security system. He said, these guys are paper tigers. They couldn't catch a bull on a street in Spain. I mean, I can slip through this all the time. I can get where I want to go. And it was mocking them. Now, they've got computers in now. He goes in and applies for a visa under the Peter H. Wu name, I'm told, American passport. They pick it up. He gets to the border, they let him in. They throw out the lady that's with him in 4 days. They hold him, and they've got him. And there are people in China say, this guy must pay a price for what he did to us. There are other Chinese saying, let's get him out of here, and let's not let this issue drag the whole relationship down. I think this fight is going on right now, as it went over Fang Lijie when I had him in the embassy for 13 months. But eventually, the people prevailed that said, get him out of here, and let's get the relationship going again. But we had a lot of tough bargaining leading up to that.
And that's what we can expect in the future.
That's what you're going into right now. What do you got? What do we got? How do we make a deal?
Ambassador Lilly, thank you very much. It's a pleasure to have you on the broadcast. I hope we can do it again.
Thank you for inviting me.
Pleasure. We'll be right back. Stay with us. Harry Wu had already spent 19 years in prison camps when he immigrated to the United States in 1985. Here is what he said about that time in an interview I did with him in January 1994.
And then under civilian, and then later arrested, put in the labor camp, forced labor camp, sentenced to life. Under the police to go through the hard labor and reform yourself, so-called brainwashing. Chinese have a very simple regulation. How you become a criminal? Because you have so many landlord class idea, bourgeois idea. So we punish you in the camp not only for punishment, but also as an opportunity we use the communism idea to reform you through the hard labor, 12 hours, 14 hours a day in the coal mine, in the industrial camp, in the farm, you know. And we want to reform you, become a new socialist people. That means you have to give up your political viewpoints, you have to commit your crime, you have to give up your religious behavior, morality, totally become a new socialist people to fix in communism society.
Tell me about how you endured even the early years, and it got worse. But how do you learn how to survive under the circumstances of what you have compared to a Soviet gulag?
Okay, if you in Chinese camp, there's a more important political function is thought reform, brainwash. The only way to survive, turn yourself into a beast. If you always think about yourself as a human, you were concerned about your freedom, your future, your family, your sex, wrong and right, that caused a big suffering to you. But you turn yourself as a beast, that was quite simple.
And what does it mean to turn yourself into a beast?
Because the beast never have a feeling, never have emotion, only thinking about grab the food from anywhere.
Survival.
Anyone. Survival.
Yeah. Joining me now is Jeffrey Fiedler, a close associate of Wu, who runs Logai Research Institute in Washington, D.C. Tell me what you know about Harry Wu in China. How is he doing? Who is he speaking with? The nature of these charges?
At about 3 o'clock Monday Beijing time, which was last night our time, an embassy official met with him in Wuhan, and I believe at a detention center, although they didn't tell me exactly which one. He said that he was okay physically and that he hadn't been beaten or tortured. It was a 30-minute meeting with the embassy, and we don't expect that they will be able to get another one for another month.
There will not be another meeting between Harry Wu and an embassy official for a month.
Well, that's what the consular agreement calls for. I'm sure that they're going to ask to see Harry sooner than that. I hope they do. But under the agreement, they may not have to allow access again for another month.
What specifically is he charged with?
Well, he hasn't been charged. He's been formally arrested. Under their system, the charge comes shortly before trial. But they've told the embassy that they will charge him with entering the country under assumed names, stealing state secrets, and passing those secrets on to foreign organizations, news organizations, presumably.
Is there any veracity? Are these charges accurate?
Well, the question of what's a state secret? In China, a state secret is just about anything that the government doesn't want the rest of the world to know. And as you know, in Harry's case, he's revealed the truth about the gulag, and so they're upset. This is really, Charlie, a political crime. Harry's a political prisoner in China today.
We will run a couple of clips when he was on this broadcast in January, but why did he go back, knowing that he probably faced certain arrest?
Well, I don't know that he felt that he faced certain arrest. Harry's been back 3 times already.
But things have seemed to take on a new turn recently.
Yeah, he was unlucky at the border post, that's for sure. Harry feels compelled to bear witness, as you know from talking to him. He went through a great deal in 19 years in the Laogai, and he is truly the moral voice about the Chinese gulag in the world today. And he's dedicated his life to it. And so to him, there was no choice but to go back and gather more information.
What do you want this government to do, and what does he want the American government to do?
I think that he would want this government to take a strong position. He understands that the Chinese only understand strength, not weakness. And so representations on his behalf should be very firmly made by this government.
What did, and what would they take, and what form would they take?
I'm not really a politician. There are many things that they could do. The question is that they should communicate very clearly in a myriad of ways that they want Harry Wu released, period. That this is a political thing that the Chinese are doing. They may not like it, but what they should do is expel him, release him soon.
Do you think the Chinese will respond to American leverage and do that?
I think the Chinese, hopefully the Chinese will respond not just to American leverage, but to international concern. Harry is a friend of the Foreign Minister of Australia, who's made official representations on his behalf. He has many friends in Europe, in different governments, and I would hope that they would weigh in. Jiang Zemin, for instance, is going to Germany, I think, tomorrow for 4 days. I would hope that there are some private conversations at very high levels in other governments with their Chinese.
Chancellor Kohl perhaps will make representations on behalf of Harry Wu?
I don't know that he will, but I would hope that he would.
How is Mrs. Wu doing?
Mrs. Wu is much better today. She's on her way to Washington. The charge of stealing state secrets and the fact that it potentially carries a death penalty initially hit her very hard. And she's been heartened by the news that the embassy saw Harry and that he appears to be well and hasn't been beaten.
Why did the Chinese do this? What do they have to gain? What is it they fear?
I don't know. I think they're certainly upset about the Taiwan president's visit to the United States. They certainly don't like Harry. They probably perceive that they have an opportunity with the United States. We de-link trade from human rights. So they may have miscalculated that it was cost-free to them. But they've clearly thought it out, because they could have thrown him out at the border.
They could have just said, no, don't come in. We know who you are. You're not coming in.
That's right, and thrown him back into Kazakhstan. So I think this is very conscious, and that's what's concerned us from the beginning.
That they want to use him as a pawn?
Perhaps, yeah.
To what end?
I don't know. I mean, they would seek any advantage that they could. Harry is a very tough person mentally. While he's 58 years old and has a back problem that is troublesome to him, he's very tough mentally, so he's not going to be such an easy pawn.
He wouldn't accept something, or what?
I don't think he's going to be very cooperative with them, no. He's not going to sign things and stuff like that. I really wouldn't expect that from Harry.
What is he communicating from prison to the American official?
We don't know that yet.
What are your worst fears? Are that he would be there, that they would carry out, he would be charged with a crime that would carry a death penalty, and it would be carried out?
Right, that's the worst. I certainly hope that's not in the cards.
They cannot do that in the context of a world pressure, can they? Or is that a naive reading of the Chinese sense of their own sovereignty?
I don't know that's naive. I'm not prepared to say they can't do anything. You remember, this is a nation of men, not of laws. This is a political crime. They're attempting to manufacture all kinds of stuff on him, like he changed his name in the United States, so they say it's an assumed name. That was all legal. He had a valid U.S. passport. They can manufacture anything they want, and therefore they can do whatever they want. I happen to think that it would be a terrible, terrible mistake for the Chinese government to do that. But I'm not taking anything for granted.
What assurances do you have, if any, from the United States government that they will do anything?
Anything? I don't think I have assurances from the U.S. government that they'll do anything. I think now that they know, remember the first week was mostly a fight to get access to Harry. And the Chinese misled them, misdirected them, delayed in violation of the consular agreement, and then finally, we always knew that access fight could not be sustained for that long in the face of international pressure. But now they realize that the Chinese are going to charge Harry, in all likelihood, with stealing state secrets. They know they have a very different problem on their hands.
Is it fair to say it was naive of him to go, notwithstanding the moral character of the man, notwithstanding what a powerful force he is? It was naive to go there in 1995 in July.
No, I don't I would characterize Harry as naive. Are you saying that it was risky? If you're saying that, I mean, you know, Charlie, Harry was and is extraordinarily careful and a very precise calculator of risk. You couldn't do what he's done unless you were. Harry is many things, but he's not naive.
David, Jeffrey, thank you very much. We obviously will follow on this story, and we'll talk to Ambassador Lily Laley, and we'll talk to others later in the week as we gather more information. I know you have to go to meet a plane, and I thank you for joining me on this program.
I appreciate it, Charlie.
Coming up now, another excerpt from the conversation with Harry Wu, January 1994, in which he talks about the Chinese government's attitude towards him. I know that, but you could live with that.
Yes, they hate me a long time ago, 3 decades ago. So what? I have to tell the truth. I have to walk tall, stand. I have to. My experience, my family experience, not belong to me. Belong to Chinese history. Also belong to human rights, human being society. If we cannot stand up, I just want to tell all my fellow countrymen, all of the Chinese around the world, we have to stand straight, walk tall, say no to Laogai, say no to communist dictatorship. We have to do that. And then the world can stand together with us to promote our country to a new, very good situation, freedom,